Vampire Hunter D, Volume 25, Undead Island. Written by Hideyuki Kikuchi. Illustrations by Yoshitaka Amano. Island in a Sea of Fog. Chapter 1. First Part. Meg was taking a break on top of a cliff that overlooked the sea and the entire village. The thought of the chicken pot pie she'd bought in the town of Pearsonen, along with the heavy-duty hooks and lines, made her stomach rumble. If Toma could have heard it, he'd have asked her to break up for sure. Just below the 60-foot-high cliff lay the Deity Wood, and beyond that was the village. The houses of the beach she'd been looking down at for 17 years, to this girl with her heart full of the springtime of youth, almost frustratingly unchanged. Still, the cramped bay and tiny boats in the distance, set against this backdrop of sea and sky, couldn't help but make Meg's heart quiver with emotion, even if she felt like a sucker all the while. It was a clear, cloudless day. The sunlight studded sea truly losing its borders, until it too seemed to part the heavens. However, there was just one thing. One black point. That seemed to be a sarcastic deity's way of saying, nothing in this world is perfect. The scene touched her heart so deeply, as she sat on the cliff, not because of the panoramic view, but in spite of it, Meg thought, occasionally frightened by the workings of her own mind. Boldly taking a seat on the edge of the cliff, Meg looked down on the sea and the sky, where a kitten-like cloud had formed. As she pulled the chicken pot pie from its tin wrapping, clearing her throat, she turned her eyes back to the sea and sky. They were changing. Huh, what's that? She said somewhat fearfully, yet she still managed to bite into her lunch, as she was still a growing girl. As she chewed in mute amazement, something from the distant horizon came swiftly creeping toward the beach. The azure and ultramarine that filled Meg's field of view were becoming a different hue, the white of fog. Meg wrapped her arms around herself. The trembling was rising from the very marrow of her bones, and she believed it wouldn't stop until the fog had cleared again. She knew the reason. It's coming from the island. Meg didn't say anything more. It was too dreadful to put into words. But in her head, like the applause that followed the climax of a play by the regional thespians, a number of words were already running around. It's from Undead Island. In the old days, we got the fog a lot. A pale-faced man said in a tone so strained the words seemed to have been extracted by torture. He was very old, with white hair and a hoary beard. Though he was stooped over and needed a metal cane to walk, his eyes had a gleam that said he burned with a vitality all his years couldn't hide. Perhaps it was fueled by fear. The old man was at the west end of a stone embankment that enclosed the narrow bay, and behind him close to 10 more people stood in the light of the sun. From the badges on their chests, it was clear that 3 of them were the sheriff and his deputies. And of the others behind them, one was a girl who from the looks of her garb was either from this village or another nearby. The rest were men who, even as they beheld this scene like a paean to the life-giving powers of sun and water, had a lingering and ill-suited air of blood and murderous thoughts about them. Any frontier resident over the age of 3 could immediately tell what they were. Bounty hunters. The men of this village were called wave braves. It means they're people of courage who don't fear the sea. The pale old man's faltering voice had a mysterious power that couldn't be attributed to failing memory as it flowed through the group. The seas might be rough, whirlpools churning, or lightning splitting the sky, but these are men who think nothing about heading out in a battered old boat if need be. But that fog, the fog from the island, made men like that bolt the doors to their houses, put out the lights and hold their breath. The fog from Undead Island, even now, nobody rightly knows what it is. Okay. That's enough of the nobody knows foreplay, said a tough and determined man that anyone would have taken at a glance as the leader of the badge-wearing contingent. Once the old man's story broke off, the lawman left some breathing room before he said to him, "We've put up with that all the way here from your house. Now spill it. Back in the day, what happened when the fog came rolling in? You said it wasn't like the situation we've got now. So how was it then?" A sort of tension sprang up around the old man, invisible to the eye. It was the concentrated attention of the girl and the quartet of bounty hunters. Every time the fog showed up, everyone turned into nobles. The girl alone gasped, while the battle-hardened men showed no change at all. Rumors about Undead Island had spread quite far across the frontier. Turned into nobles. The horrifying import of those words was clear to the old-timer as he said that. Fog pressed in from the sea one night to turn everything milky white. A few villagers got pairs of raw, swollen teeth marks on the nape of their necks, and then they in turn saw the blood of their family and neighbors. In the 72 years I spent in the village, the old man continued, the fog hit us 3 times, and every time, a couple of people would go after their families for blood, and they and all those they bit got staked through their hearts. And the only reason we managed to slay the predators in fog so thick, we could barely see our hands in front of our own faces, aside from the first few people turned into nobles, and those drained of blood only became nobility the night after they joined the dead. And the fog's incursion ended quickly enough. When we got the second wave of it, 5 folks total turned into nobles first. 4 of them were put down as soon as the fog cleared, but the last one escaped into the sea. On hearing that, the sheriff was just about to shout, "Hold it right there." However, it was actually one of the bounty hunters who spoke up. A giant of a man even more powerfully built than the sheriff, and as hirsute as the old man. Only in his case the whiskers were jet black. His name was Garrigon. "Hold it right there, Mr. Former Mayor. Fresh water or salt? I thought nobles and those they've turned weren't supposed to be able to cross running water." Me and the 4 villagers I was with all saw the men swimming out to sea by the light of the moon. Ever since, we haven't put any stock in the legends about running water. So, did that fella head off to Undead Island? I don't know. No one was about to follow him. And did the fog really come from the island? The old man nodded. Back before I was even born, and I'm talking more than 100 years ago, there was a bunch of villagers who went out to the island to see if maybe folks could live there. And their report was pretty surprising. When they came back, they said that setting aside the facilities left by the nobility, Undead Island could be called a paradise on earth, filled with plants and animals, and the sea around it a treasure trove of fish and shellfish, and with all the fowl you'd care to shoot. But what whipped the village up more than anything was the way they said soil out on the island was real well suited to farming. As you can see, mountains border the village on 3 sides, so they've only fishing to rely on for their daily bread. Now the men might have been too proud, but the women they left tending the homes wanted a life of working the unshaking soil instead of an existence on a sea that'll turn wild at the drop of a hat. Less than 2 weeks after the survey party came back, 7 families from the village, 30 people, all told, decided to cross the sea and take up permanent residence on the island. On Undead Island, one of the sheriff's deputies murmured, although the head lawman and his 2 underlings wore standard-issue gun belts, the hands poised to reach for their weapons all trembled faintly. In contrast to that, the bounty hunters actually seemed to be enjoying the old man's tale, and the youngest of them, a boy who still looked to be in his late teens, was twanging the short bow he had under his left arm as he said, "I never heard this story before. Now things are getting interesting. You know, I've heard a lot of talk about Undead Island, but it's always kind of fuzzy on the details. Is there really one of the nobility spaceports out there on the island?" "There's something like that. Only it seems not a single soul from the survey party or the settlers who came later ever set foot inside it. All there ever was on that facility were reports about the outward appearances. And based on those, it seems it wasn't a spaceport. But then with the nobility, you never can tell. Back then the fog didn't roll in, I take it. If it had, and the results had been similar to the present situation, there probably wouldn't have been any talk of establishing a settlement." The old person confirmed this with a nod, saying, "Not that I've heard. What happened to all those settlers then? Did they pull up stakes and come back?" It took a while for the old man to respond. "They're still out on the island." "Meaning what?" "They got wiped out," asked the 3rd bounty hunter. In his right hand he gripped an 18-inch short spear. The old man shook his head. 2 expressions occupied the deeply wrinkled face, weathered by wave and wind and sun. Fear and a smile. "Seems they're not dead," he said. "What do you mean by that?" This question came from Garrigon's lips. "You see, the first time the fog hit, one of the nobles who attacked the village had been part of that group of settlers. First part, and